Hey everyone, welcome back to the Revelation class. In this video we'll be looking at Revelation chapter 7 in its entirety. As well as we're looking at the Jim Jonas material, we'll be looking at week 7, days 3 through 5. So the rest of week 7 for this material. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead and read Revelation chapter 3. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and read verses 1, Revelation chapter 7, excuse me. Go ahead and read verses 1 through 3. Okay, as we saw last week, at Revelation chapter 6, part 2, you had the last two seals of the scroll being opened, right? The Lamb takes the scroll from the one who's sitting on the throne. Nobody can open it, but the Lamb can, and it's got these 7 seals. And we talked about the first 4 seals. Last 2 seals a little bit different. And then the last seal, I mean, you just see some cosmic disaster, don't you? You see everything that was arranged being disarranged pretty much by God in his wrath, avenging the ones who were under the altar in the 5th seal. So some different things being seen there. And what I want us to understand, that the ones who were under the altar, they asked God, how long is it going to be for you to avenge us? And in the 6th seal, you see some of that vengeance there. What I want us to understand is that's really a preview of things to happen, kind of just like something just to whet your appetite. It isn't actually happening just yet, but just a preview of what's to come. Kind of like when TV shows will say something like, scenes from next week's episode or something like that. You know, it's just something there to keep you interested in the TV sense, not in the biblical sense. But anyways, you know, it's just a preview of things to come. And then in chapter 7, something happens. As you've read the first 3 verses, you would expect to see, after the final judgment of God, just something, right? Something, a victory or maybe something like that. But no. Chapter 7 begins, and really the entirety of chapter 7 is what we like to call an interlude. You know, if we're still thinking about this as, you know, Revelation being a play, chapter 7 is kind of an interlude. Okay, there were 7 seals on the scroll, but only 6 were open. What about that 7th one? We're going to have to wait a chapter before we see the 7th one opening. So, I've asked you to read. Go ahead and read verses 1 through 3, and we can sort of talk about what's being said there. I want you also to have that number sheet out. It's going to be very helpful. There's a couple of different times in this chapter where we'll be using it. So in verse 1, it says, after these I saw one of the 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, and the wind that should not blow on the earth and the sea or on any tree. So talking about the 4 corners, right? We use the number 4 to talk about earth, its inhabitants, its realm, things like that. Think about the 4 directions, this and that. And they're ready to blow on the earth, but they're not going to, because he saw another angel, verse 2, ascending on the east. And he had a seal on him of the living God. And he cried out with a loud voice to the 4 angels, who was granted no harm to the earth or sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. Right? So that 6th seal, you saw this great judgment being put on those who were wicked, those who had caused harm to the Christians in the 5th seal. And before that happens, chapter 7 comes in, and it's the angels who are ready to act, right? And then one comes who has the seal of God on him, and he says, don't do anything yet. Hold up, don't do anything. We have to seal some people first. In verse 3, he says, we have sealed the servants of God on their foreheads. No judgment yet. Wait till we seal the servants of God first. So we can talk about that, and I'll show you the slide on screen where we're at. But it's really for us to understand, okay? We need to seal the servants of God first. What does that mean? What does all that entail? So if I were to ask you, what does a seal mean? What does that indicate? What would you say? Yeah, well, you can look on screen. There's 3 different things that we addressed here in the slides. But, you can think about what seals are used for nowadays, right? Go to the store, get a bottle of ketchup. They got those, they have those awkward seals where it's like the plastic wrap and it's got like 2 little lines where you're supposed to tear it. Basically, seals are to protect from any sort of tampering, right? If something is sealed well, you're not going to be able to open it. And it's hard to open ketchup bottles. And after you open that seal, you open up the cap, and there's another seal there. So they're there to protect whatever is inside, or whatever is being sealed, right? From any sort of tampering, any sort of manipulating of whatever it is, right? That's what a seal is used for. You go to Matthew chapter 27, the seal that was put over Jesus' tomb. Nobody's supposed to get in. Nobody was supposed to get out unless they were ordained to do so, right? It would have been a really heavy rock there. I think we understand that, right? But it's probably the form of the seal that we're most familiar with. In Solomon chapter 8, Song of Solomon chapter 8, verse 6, I think the wife is the one who says, set me as a seal on your heart, set me as a seal upon your arms. What she's saying in those verses is, I belong to you, you belong to me. Solomon was the first one to pen something like that, wasn't Taylor Swift. Sorry for that dry humor, but basically it's a really beautiful scene there where he says, we belong to each other. We have ownership over each other. So if you seal something, that means you belong to that individual, whoever it was that sealed you. I've never worked in an office before, but, you always see, like on TV, workers who go to their offices and their cubicles. They always set their meal inside the fridge, and they always sign it with their name. This is my meal. Nobody else is supposed to eat it. Tupperware. A lot of women like to write their names on their Tupperware at parties and stuff to make sure that they get theirs back. It shows ownership, right? So God is planning on sealing His servants. He's planning on sealing them so that way nobody manipulates them. He's planning on sealing them to show that He has ownership over them. And then as that third one you see there, it could also mean certification. There are times in the Old Testament, really just in history, where especially older kings, they would have this ring, like a signet ring or something like that. And they would declare law. They would say, by my decree we declare this law and we're putting it into action. They would get their ring and they'd put their seal down on the paper or whatever, the parchment. And that would mean that the king certified whatever law it was. And I say all those things to say is, to be sealed by God means that He is protecting you, you are His, and He has certified you to be His. And I think that's something that can't go unseen. And can't go, left behind. There's sometimes in Revelation we'll say, maybe we don't know. That's something that I think we have to get. We are sealed by God, and what all that might entail. And the reason He's sealing these people, remind us, is that He's sealing it because there was a judgment that was about to happen. But the angel said, hold up, wait until we seal the servants of God. If you go back to Ezekiel chapter 9, we won't talk about it, we won't read that passage in this video, but you can go back there. Ezekiel chapter 9, verse 1 through 11. Something very similar happens in that context, right? God was about to enact judgment on His people, but He said, if you're worried about spiritual things, and you're my servant, He shows Ezekiel, go put a seal on them to say, they're safe from the wrath to come. And that's basically what's being shown there. So, to be saved from the wrath to come, you need that seal, right? And here in the next couple of verses, we're going to see who gets that seal. So, go ahead and do me a favor and read verses 4 through 8, please. So, having read verses 4 through 8, you realize, the first preceding verse, said that people were being sealed servants of God. We now know who they are. And verse 4 says that the number of them who's going to be sealed is going to be 144,000. Of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. And it begins to mention who gets sealed first. It says Judah, and then Reuben. And we'll get into just a little bit of that in just a second. But you see the ones who are sealed, right? And it gives them the number 12,000. A couple different things that we probably need to talk about. Jim Jones asks a question, I think it's question number 10 in your material. He says, what's the purpose of the number? What's the purpose of it being the children of Israel? Are these items literal? Is this talking about a literal number of the people who are going to be saved, be sealed? Because a lot of denominations will take this passage and they'll take some things of it literal and some other things of it not so literal. There are a lot of denominations that say there's only going to be 144,000 people that are going to be saved and there ain't going to be any more. That's the way they put it. But those some people don't want to say that the people that are going to be saved out of those 144,000 are just Jews or descendants of the tribes of Israel. They say, well, that's just figurative, but the number's real. So we can't say something is real and something's not, or something isn't and then something is. We can't just pick and choose. if you'll be reminded, and you're actually going to see this later on more and more in the book of Revelation, the people of Israel, the tribes of Israel, are just a representative of God's people. That's all it is. The tribes there being a representative of those who are his servants. You and I would be included in that. And the reason for that being is, God chose them back in the Old Testament. And you're going to see later on in the book of Revelation how even more it just signifies, look, it's talking about God's people. As for the number 12, if you look at your number sheet, 12 is typically the number given to God's people. 12 tribes of Israel, 12 sons of Jacob, 12 apostles, right? You'll see them later on in chapter 21, chapter 20. How important that number plays in terms of it indicating God's people. So all this is figurative, by the way. Is the number going to be that? No, it just means God's people. Is it really just going to be Jews? No, once again, just meaning God's people. Couple of different things, we won't spend a whole lot of time talking about them. If we were in our winter quarter class like we did last 4 or 5 months ago, we did spend some good time talking about the details of this passage. But we can't really conversate in this medium, so I won't touch on everything because, quite simply, we don't know some of the answers. Why is Judah the first one? Because Reuben was the first son, right? Why was Judah the first one mentioned there in verse 5? I don't know. Maybe because that was the ruling tribe. Maybe that's because in chapter 4 or 5, the lamb was talked about coming from the tribe of Judah. I don't know. Line of the tribe of Judah. I don't know. We don't know for sure. There's a couple of different sons here that are not there that would have had tribes in the Old Testament. Why are they gone? Why is the arrangement the way it is? Don't know exactly. And it's okay to say that. But what you need to take away from this is that this is clearly talking about God's people. Who they are, who we're getting the stamps, or the seals, upon them. And I think that that can't be missed, that they were getting this for them. So in all these things, I want us to understand that these were God's people who were being sealed. You can look on screen, there's some artist depictions of what that might have looked like, this and that. But basically, these were the ones who were being saved from any sort of wrath of God that was to come. So keep that in mind as you read now verse 9 through 17 as we close out the chapter. Go ahead and read verses 9 through 17. So now in verse 9, John gets to see a new scene, right? He sees beings, individuals, a whole multitude surrounding the one before the throne and before the Lamb. Which, by the way, we need to make this clear. Where is this setting at? If it's before the throne, there was one who was sitting on the throne. There was before the Lamb. This is obviously talking about heaven, right? He's getting to see a little bit into heaven. And there's this great multitude, and he says in verse 9, they're coming from everywhere, which nobody can number, by the way, innumerable. And everybody was crying out with a loud voice. They were praising God. They were praising the Lamb. So that's what you see in verses 9 and 10. As it continues on, verse 11, they continue to do these things, and they worship God. And then the elder asks John, every once in a while, you'll remember this, right? There were 24 elders around that one big throne. You can go back to chapter 4 and remember that. Anyways, one of them, every once in a while, throughout the book of Revelation, these elders will have a dialogue with John, right? And he asks, John, who are these? And it says in verse 13, he said, who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? Because in verse 9 it talks about them. And John, I don't know, I guess he sensed that it was a rhetorical question or something, but he tells the elders, sir, you know who it is. And he begins to tell them, and I do want to read this description in verse 14. These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. I'll read verse 16, 17 just a second. Really beautiful description there, right? These are the guys who made it, who overcame. About to have some technical difficulties. 1 second. Sorry about that brief interruption, but you'll notice in Revelation chapter 7, the elder asks again, I'll repeat myself, who are these people that you see, this grand multitude that can't be numbered? And John says, you know who they are. It says they're the ones who've washed, they've washed themselves in the blood of the Lamb, which is By the way, totally contradictory to how that works in real life. But if you go to Hebrews chapter 9, verse 13 through 14, that Lamb who was without blemish was able to wash our consciousness and us of our dirty deeds. Couldn't make it to heaven without that. I'll make this point later on in Revelation that your works are important for you getting to heaven, and that's certainly true. I think this is really considering salvation. We couldn't get salvation without Jesus. And I know I'm speaking primarily to a crowd that understands that. But when I read it here, and just seeing how important it is, it's the only thing that's going to get you to heaven. Without it, you're not. So, you can't emphasize that enough. So he tells them, this is who they are. God's going to be with them. There's not going to be any night there. He says, verse 16 through 17, they shall neither hunger no more, nor thirst any more, and the sun shall not strike them shall not strike them nor any heat. For the Lamb who's in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and will lead them to the living fountains of water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Talking about what heaven's going to be like. And we go to these verses a lot, right? And we understand this. It's really rich here. The Lamb's going to shepherd them. Once again, really contradictory to how we think about things in the world. Lamb's going to shepherd them. He's going to lead them to waters, fountains of living water. Go back to John 4, right? When Jesus had that conversation with the woman at the well. It makes so much sense now. He was offering her a certain kind of water that can only be found here in heaven, or can only be offered by the Lamb. And the only ones who are getting this, remind you, are the ones who have the stamp or the seal on their forehead. It being on your forehead, think about when you were a kid in high school and you had acne and pimples. If there's a pimple on your forehead, everybody sees it, right? In other words, while you're here on earth, there's not going to be any question if you're a servant of God or not. You are a servant of God. You need to show that. People need to see it on your forehead, not in a proud sort of way, but just to say, I'm owned by God. I'm certified by Him. He protects me. And as a result of that, we now see those who had been saved, the number, also in verse 9, saying it's innumerable, and the multitude that is there in heaven after being washed by the blood of the Lamb. I think it's a really beautiful image there. By the way, this is an interlude between the 6th seal and the 7th seal, and all of it is just a preview of things to come. So next week, Lord willing, we'll be looking at chapter 8, and we'll see the 7th seal being open and what all that entails. If you have any questions or comments about anything that I've said, feel free to contact me and I'll get back to you. Thank you.